Good morning. It's Sunday, April the 29th. I'm Ali Velshi. We are taking stock this morning of the impact of thousands of No Kings protests and the next fight for the new resistance. Donald Trump's single-minded obsession with a dangerous new voter suppression plan. Plus, Trump is positioning ground troops in the Middle East with 3,500 arriving in the region, just as Israel is expanding its ground invasion into Lebanon, a story that hasn't got as much coverage, but I want to tell you about in detail. And everything you want to know about a bombshell legal ruling that could change social media forever. But we begin this hour with an investigation into a Trump administration scandal that has largely flown under the radar, but appears ready to break open into a Watergate-level crisis for the president. Now, while it's tempting to recall Watergate having been triggered by a break-in, it actually had its roots with an antitrust scandal and a thread that two lawmakers refused to stop pulling on. In the early 1970s, the Nixon administration stood accused of interfering in a Justice Department case against ITT, International Telephone and Telegraph. Now, you'll remember it if you're a person of a certain age, as I am. ITT was a conglomerate that controlled telecom, hotels, defense contracts, and plenty of other things. The allegation is that the DOJ went easy on ITT's antitrust case in exchange for ITT funding part of the 1972 Republican National Convention, corporate money in exchange for government favor in a deal. A Texas Democrat named Wright Patman, then a chair of the House Banking Committee, tried to investigate. But Patman was blocked by members of his own party, Democratic Party, who called it too risky a thing to do in an election year. So Patman passed the info he had to a Democratic Senator, Sam Ervin. Ervin's committee, the Senate Watergate Committee, ran with it. Then the courts, then the press. Then more congressional probes. Piece by piece, the scandal came into focus. The ITT antitrust case may seem obscure today, but it revealed the administration's willingness to bend rules for political and corporate gain, setting the stage for the Watergate break-in, which is the part of the scandal most Americans remember. As investors began digging into these financial and political connections, the Nixon campaign grew increasingly paranoid about leaks and opposition research. That fear and suspicion led to the infamous break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate Hotel. It triggered the historic investigations that forced a sitting president to resign just 2 years later. And that history matters today because what the Wall Street Journal has uncovered inside the current Justice Department may be the Trump administration's first antitrust domino. And it's already putting people inside the administration on high alert. This is a good story, so I want you to pay attention to this. The Journal describes a scandal that, quote, casts a shadow over the Justice Department's integrity and has alarmed even some Trump loyalists in the department, end quote. And at the center of it is this man, Mike Davis. Now, pay attention to him. To understand Mike Davis's role, you've got to understand how he got here. After the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago, Mike Davis became one of Donald Trump's most aggressive public defenders, making thousands of media appearances, positioning himself as a top outside legal ally, not officially part of Donald Trump's team. In Davis's own words, quote, I have a very good relationship with the president, and it became very strong when I was just about the only person who was defending him on TV after the Mar-a-Lago raid, end quote. Trump, as expected, rewarded that loyalty publicly, calling Davis tough as hell on the campaign trail and someone he wanted in a, quote, very high capacity. After the election, Davis helped recommend key figures to lead antitrust enforcement, including this woman, Gail Slater, whom Trump nominated as Assistant Attorney General to run the Justice Department's antitrust division. A massive job when you're in an administration that wants a lot of deals to go through. Donald Trump got a lot of money from massive corporations to ease up on approval for deals. And then, by his own account, Mike Davis turned around and bragged to the same officials that he'd helped install that corporate clients were, quote, beating his door down because of his amazing White House access. That's according to the Wall Street Journal as well. Beating his door down. Just let that sit for a second. Mike Davis helped pick the referees, the regulators. Then he showed up to play the game. And when those referees refused to play ball the way he wanted them to, according to multiple accounts, they all lost their jobs. But I'm going to get there in a minute. I don't want to get away from this story, so stay with me. Davis has cultivated what the Wall Street Journal described as a crass street fighter persona. In one example, he reportedly told former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who you will recall survived an assassination attempt in 2011, to F off after she spoke out about gun violence. The Wall Street Journal notes that he's had multiple suspensions from X, formerly Twitter. This is who Mike Davis is. But that persona isn't bluster. It appears to be operational. The former FTC chair, William Kovacic, appointed by President George W. Bush, put it plainly. Lobbyists who once thrived behind the scenes now loudly tout their connections and wins. Davis, he said, is the face of this movement. In previous administrations, Kovacic noted, you never want to be seen holding the knife. Once you've got the background, let's get the cases now. A $14 billion merger last year, Hewlett-Packard Enterprises and Juniper Networks. Career antitrust lawyers tried to block this deal, arguing it would reduce competition in a critical tech sector. You can be excused if you don't remember anything about this case, because with all the news last year, it was hard to make it make sense. Instead, regulators pushed for a pretty standard fix. They required the merged company to sell off key assets so that it is less concentrated and market dominating. That's how antitrust enforcement is supposed to work, so that one company doesn't become too controlling. But according to a sworn deposition from the DOJ official Roger Alford, testimony that was filed as part of a formal Tunney Act proceeding, I'll tell you about that in a second, Mike Davis, the lawyer I've been telling you about, called the antitrust chief at the Department of Justice, Gail Slater, remember the one that he helped get into the job, and he said this, quote, "If you don't approve this settlement, I will destroy you. I will destroy your job at the DOJ." Slater was understandably shaken enough to report the call immediately. Davis denies he said it, but the allegation was made under oath by a senior Justice Department official in formal leading proceedings. So if someone's lying here, someone's going to get in big trouble. When the Justice Department's career lawyers tried to block the Hewlett-Packard Juniper merger in order to protect competition, Mike Davis and the company's lawyers didn't negotiate on the merits of the case, as would normally happen. Instead, they went over the heads of agency staff, allegedly appealing directly to Trump-appointed leadership and using back-channel outreach to senior Department of Justice officials, according to the Journal. Even as Slater instructed the company that no more lobbyists should be involved in the process, a directive meant to stop outside influence, Davis was already allegedly meeting privately with top officials behind the scenes, bypassing the very people responsible for enforcing the law. Again, according to the Wall Street Journal. Then came one of the most extraordinary moments of this whole story. I hope you're still with me. It's a long story, but it's really interesting. A senior Department of Justice official walked into Gail Slater's office and placed a settlement term sheet on her desk, written by Hewlett-Packard's own lawyers, according to the Journal. Written not by government regulators, but by the company seeking regulator approval. The document dropped the key asset divestiture requirement, which would have required Hewlett-Packard to sell off certain assets, the very condition that was meant to prevent them from becoming a monopoly. When Slater asked her superior, the Associate Attorney General Stanley Woodward, what would happen if she refused to sign, he reportedly told her he would fire her deputies, according to the Wall Street Journal. The very next day, the deal was announced. Weeks later, her deputies were terminated. Months after that, Gail Slater, the person Davis himself helped install and then allegedly threatened, was out of the department. According to the Journal, Mike Davis pushed for Gail Slater's removal and then celebrated it publicly the way he is in more than a dozen posts on X. In his own deposition, he acknowledged recommending her firing to, quote, anyone who would listen. Notably, the case is far from over, by the way. 33 state attorneys general refused to join the settlement and are continuing the fight. In court filings, they wrote, quote, the series of events that led to the settlement are unprecedented and should shock the conscience. Threats were made against the head of the antitrust division and her top deputies. The U.S. completely abdicated its role as a principled defender of antitrust laws and through the corrupt lobbying process has abandoned any semblance of a reasoned and principled decision-making process, end quote. Now, here's the thing. After Watergate, Congress passed something I mentioned earlier called the Tunney Act to prevent Exactly this kind of corruption, requiring parties to disclose meetings, contacts, and communications. But investigators say key meetings with lobbyists were never disclosed. Back-channel contacts were left off of official records. Text messages involving Davis were never produced. That missing paper trail is a central concern for Matt Stoller, the research director at the American Economic Liberties Project and one of the country's sharpest outside analysts of antitrust and monopoly power, who's been tracking these cases and flagging the significance of those gaps in the record. Because this isn't just one case. In a separate merger involving real estate giant Compass, antitrust enforcers called for a deeper investigation. Compass hired Mike Davis to help push the acquisition. According to the Journal's reporting, the company wanted to avoid a second request, which is a routine part of antitrust enforcement in which an agency asked for more information to decide whether to block or approve a deal. As the Wall Street Journal noted, Slater wanted one. Slater was overruled, and the deal went through right in the middle of a national housing crisis. And then came, like I said, this is not done. Then came the case you might actually have heard of, even if you don't know the backstory. Live Nation Entertainment and its ticketing arm, Ticketmaster, one of the biggest antitrust cases in the country, accusing Live Nation of using its absolute dominance over concerts, venues, and ticketing to crush competition and drive up prices. I'm sure a story you're pretty familiar with. The government argued that the company controls roughly half the concert promotion market. The general rules in government is no company should control more than a third of anything. Live Nation controls half. Court filings describe internal company conversations about how stupid their customers are and how they were robbing their customers blind. The antitrust staff at the Department of Justice was actively litigating this case in federal court when suddenly a settlement appeared, negotiated above their heads. Antitrust regulators were completely shut out of the process, not once, not twice, but throughout, according to reporting by the Wall Street Journal and by Matt Stoller. And here's where it gets extraordinary. According to the Wall Street Journal, citing people familiar with the conversations, Donald Trump was personally calling aides, asking why the case hadn't been settled. What's the holdup? He asked. The Journal reports that Trump heard about the case from Ari Emanuel, the Hollywood super agent and former Live Nation board member who reportedly urged Donald Trump to get this solved. On March 3rd, Trump hosted a controversial White House meeting with the Live Nation CEO, Michael Rapino, the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, and Gail Slater's acting replacement. Remember, Gail Slater's gone now. That same day, a settlement was signed, and the company avoided a breakup. Critics called the outcome an effective corporate pardon of powerful monopoly. As the Journal put it, quote, it was an extraordinary role for a president to play in a routine antitrust investigation. The federal judge's reaction, by the way, was not nearly as subtle. The DOJ's own lead trial attorney told the court, I only saw the term sheet when you did. Read that again. The nation's top antitrust enforcers standing in front of a judge in a federal court telling the judge that they were kept completely in the dark about a settlement in a case that they were actively prosecuting. The judge called it outrageous. Quote, it shows absolute disrespect for the court, for the jury, for this entire process, and it is entirely unacceptable, end quote. Guess who Live Nation had on its retainer? Mike Davis. According to the Journal's reporting, Davis earns fees across his client portfolio that can reach $300,000 a month, representing companies with billions on the line. In his own words, I know the people, I know the pressure points, I know how to win, end quote. Watergate didn't begin with a break-in. It began with an antitrust thread and two lawmakers who refused to let it go. Once they pulled, everything else followed. What we know so far comes from sworn depositions, court filings, and investigative reporting by the Wall Street Journal, along with the ongoing analytical work of Matt Stoller, who's been among the most precise outside observers of what's happening inside the current DOJ. The bigger question is what hasn't come out yet. As Stoller puts it, and I want you to hear this, quote, this is linked to the first real investigation of the administration by anyone with any power, which is the Democratic state attorneys general themselves. These people are co-plaintiffs in a bunch of different cases with the Trump Justice Department, and the Live Nation settlement isn't the first time they've witnessed such bad acts, end quote. I'm joined by Matt Stoller, Director of Research at